Hey everyone, today I'm going to be presenting a culture profile of how to negotiate as a Middle Eastern or with a Middle Eastern. And that sounds like a huge topic. It actually is. There's so many levels to it. We're just going to dive into not surface level customs, values, and traditions, but more so invisible cultural forces that could affect negotiations. This is just a map of the Middle East, and there are some discrepancies between different sources, but I've just relied on this in determining the countries from the Middle East. Let's just start with a couple of facts about the Middle East. It's got 17 countries. Um, Dominant religions include mainly Islam, but there are other religions such as Christianity, Judaism. There's a lot of Druze communities, Jewish communities. So it's really diverse in terms of religion. Languages vary too. Arabic is most common and mostly used, but there's languages such as Hebrew, Kurdish, Persian, Turkish, French, and English because French because we were colonized by the French, at least some of the countries, such as Lebanon. Politically, some countries have monarchies, such as mostly the Gulf region, but others have republics, such as Iraq, Lebanon, and Egypt. Economically, the Middle East does hold over 48% of the world's oil reserves, mainly in Saudi Arabia. But all this means that negotiations are very rich and they're very complex. There's a lot of history and power dynamics into it, and this could influence how people talk and negotiate. Now we are moving on to Globe Framework, which essentially helps understand national cultures through the lens of nine cultural dimensions. I've narrowed it down to four, which are relevant to the Middle East and can affect negotiations. To start with, hierarchical relationships and authority is appreciated, which translates into the high power distance. So, when negotiating, people usually don't assume a flat structure, and challenging someone directly without knowing their title isn't so much a good idea. Now, in group collectivism is also very high in the Middle East because there is loyalty to tribes, families, or close networks and connections. Decisions are often made based on who that person is, not just what they're offering. Now, a very important one is moderate assertiveness. In the Middle East, communication tends to be more indirect and diplomatic. Confrontation, not really a thing. Um, Within a negotiation, Middle Easterns might use the phrase inshallah, as in God willing, to brush off certain ideas or delay them. Criticism isn't direct, and essentially, it always is to avoid offending others. And finally, moderate performance orientation just shows that success is valued, but is often seen through a lens of status, relationships, and loyalty, not just metrics or results. So, this helps us understand a little bit of how negotiations could be affected. Now let's take a brief look at how culture shows up within the organization itself in a country using Edgar's Sheehan model. He breaks down culture into three layers: artifacts, espoused values, and assumptions. Let's start with artifacts. Artifacts is what you see off of face value and experience. In a Middle Eastern culture organization, you'll probably see traditional attire such as abayas or thobes for the Gulf, for example. They tend to serve coffee and have lengthy greetings. They prefer face to face meetings. And their business setting is usually offices that have portraits of national leaders, calligraphy, religious items, etc. Now, let's move on to the next layer, which is espoused values. This is what people say they believe in. And this is where it gets interesting. In the Middle East, and specifically in organizations within the Middle East, they tend to have emphasis on professionalism and efficiency, whereas time is flexible and they value relationships over punctuality. So they would rather spend time building the connection, building the trust and the relationship over time, over having being time efficient and achieving results. Another important one is merit and fairness is very promoted in businesses, whereas wasta and connections essentially can get you a long way and influences hiring and business deals. So essentially what this model tries to do is help understand the full picture, not just what people say they do or believe in, but what they believe in silently is revealed. After having delved into the cultural dimensions and how culture can affect negotiations, let's actually take a look at how A Middle Eastern might pass through a negotiation, especially through the phases. In the differentiation phase, a Middle Eastern would probably expect a relationship to be built and a connection to start developing. Usually, they start with personal rapport, small talk, and non business dialogue. It could include anything to do with the weather, family, some origin stories that they might relate to, and essentially just give information, but also seek information from the other party. So they expect information to be shared. And in that stage, I think assessing body language, tone, and interpersonal dynamics is crucial. However, in the exploration phase, yes, new ideas start to be introduced. And if introduced by junior members, that's done cautiously. There is very high respect for hierarchy, especially if someone up the hierarchy is present at the negotiation. In that stage, discussions very high context and rejections are very subtle. They rarely happen within Middle Eastern culture. If they do happen at that stage, words like inshallah or we'll consider it tend to be used to brush it off smoothly. In the exchange phase, finally, concessions tend to be made but are very gradual and slow. The final decisions are usually taken by senior leaders or family heads, not by the groups themselves. And disagreements always stay behind closed doors, they're not publicly announced. Now, following from that, how can someone negotiate effectively with a Middle Eastern individual or group as part of a business negotiation? In the differentiation phase, definitely put in the effort and take the time to build the trust and a connection, a personal connection before jumping into business. Always be diplomatic and avoid being too blunt. Doesn't Bluntness doesn't mesh well with Middle Eastern culture, especially that they have moderate assertiveness and tend to convey ideas in a vague manner. Learn local customs and titles because seniority is very respected, and not knowing how to speak to senior level executives could lead to a mistrustful environment. During the exploration, I think essentially it's important to be patient. Usually, ideas take time to be built and discussed on an internal level. Again, it's very important to use indirect language, and at that stage, focus on reading between the lines. Not everything is explicit, majority of the messages to be conveyed are implied. So, using direct message is not usually appreciated. And don't blurt out abruptly a yes or a no or an abrupt decision. Also, don't push for an immediate answer. Finally, in the exchange phase, offer concessions but slowly and gracefully. Usually, Middle Easterns don't like to be told off, and public disagreement isn't appreciated. So, one major thing before decisions are made, expect that they might be made from a top down approach and not from group consensus. Now, I think this is the cherry on top of the cake because this is something a lot of people tend to miss. The Middle East is not one monolithic culture. Within each country, there tends to be different groups, such as Sunni and Shia Muslims. There's Christian minorities, different Christian groups, such as the Maronites, Assyrians, Coptics, um, tribal families, public sector organizations, Western educated executives. So each group negotiates differently. I think, for example, let's take one example a family run firm in Saudi Arabia would probably value tradition and mediation, while a multinational firm in Dubai might prefer speed and data driven logic. So always take the time to understand the small cultures that our counterparts belong to. It's not just one culture and one fit for all. To wrap up, I think this taught me a lot because I know that yes, one can prepare before going into a negotiation with someone from a different culture background by looking up the culture, researching the cultural norms, values, dimensions, and generally just learning more about the culture. But I think this quote particularly resonated with me when regional identity masks subcultural complexity. Shared geography doesn't mean shared negotiation style. And I even asked ChatGPT to generate three conflicts that might happen as part of negotiations. And the three topics that ChatGPT came up with was national subcultural clash, religious nuance in negotiation, and misaligned cultural scripts, all of which I felt made sense because they could be things that might happen as a result of assumptions. People tend to assume that people or a group of people from the same culture will behave exactly the same, especially in business negotiations. And this is the reference list, which essentially has all the references I've used throughout the presentation. Thank you.